Cinematic platformers are a rare commodity when it comes to gaming, but there are many recognisable and standout titles among its genre. Heart of Darkness, with no similarity to its literature counterpart by Joseph Conrad, was a game released on the PlayStation 1 and PC that explores a young boy's fear of the dark in a world full of shadowy creatures. Though not as significant to the genre as others, Heart of Darkness is a game I often think back to in fondness for its challenging and wonderfully animated gameplay. Replaying it now, I can say that in some ways it has aged well, but like many others in its time, it has its share of problems.
Andy! Have you nodded off again?
No, I was just...
Sleeping in my class in broad daylight! Well, let's see if you're more alert in the dark!
Heart of Darkness's landscape is reminiscent of Another World, an excellent game in its own right, and is technically the starting point for this game. Another World's lead developer Eric Chahi, riding on the success of its release in 1991, formed the team Amazing Studio. Production started on Heart of Darkness right away, but Eric found it challenging to work in his studio with the upcoming evolution of 3D-based gaming. It took so long to figure out that the original intended launch console 3DO was no longer a viable option. This then became a larger issue of having to reprogram the game for the newer Sega Saturn system, that unfortunately ended up suffering from the exact same problem and wasn't being able to release for it. Eventually the game was picked up by the publisher Interplay, and was finally launched on the PC and PlayStation 1 in 1998, a good 6 years after the initial development started. This rocky road shook developer Eric Chahi's confidence in making video games, that ultimately led to his 13-year hiatus from the industry. He later returned when inspired by the indie movement in 2010 and the sudden re-interest of the industry with 2D games, that eventually led him to design the interesting god game From Dust for Ubisoft. Heart of Darkness was the only game ever created under the Amazing Studio, and one that we were quite lucky to get at all.
Oh wow! Afraid of the dark? Come back here this minute, young man!
No way, Jose!
As opposed to Another World, Heart of Darkness' story was told explicitly through FMV cutscenes. These sequences are most certainly a product of a bygone era, with incredibly awkward and simplistic animation that just doesn't hold up to some of the other PlayStation titles. The story takes the perspective of a young boy named Andy who is afraid of the dark, and upon watching a solar eclipse finds his dog Whisky stolen by shadowy forces. With an assortment of inventions, Andy proceeds to face his fears in order to rescue his buddy from a collection of dark creatures. Bolstered by composer Bruce Brosnan's Hollywood-like score, the game does come off as a cinematic adventure, even if it hasn't aged well. That's not to say the game doesn't look beautiful, with pre-rendered backgrounds and fantastically animated 2D characters comprising of the gameplay you experience. Each location is oozing with atmosphere that really sells the otherworldliness of the place Andy finds himself in. Transitioning from gameplay to cutscene wasn't something really done at the time this came out, and it's done quite effectively. This and the short load times is likely the reason that the game is actually spread out over 2 discs in order to sell the immersion between FMV and actual gameplay. Upon commencement of Andy's adventure, he's initially equipped with his trusty laser gun, introducing you to the various mechanics implemented in Heart of Darkness. From destroying and dodging shadowy creatures, to climbing and jumping across platforms, each offers compelling gameplay options to experience. Death is all but guaranteed on a first playthrough, as enemies and environment feature challenges that need to be solved, something that is typically associated with this genre. Although they can sometimes feel cheap, learning from your mistakes and discovering a solution is a fun loop that is sold by the amazing animation work. Every movement feels fluid and lifelike, creating a real sense of understanding and excitement for each encounter. Quickly your ability to defend yourself is taken away, leading the puzzles to take center stage for a while, although it does return later in various forms. Removing and granting some abilities keeps the game feeling fresh, while leaving the options limited to allow the players to discover solutions without tutorial prompts. Admittedly, the controls at times can feel a bit sluggish, but as you progress through the game and get used to lethal encounters, it becomes much more comfortable. These enemies are significantly varied, that always present a real threat with the ability to kill Andy in one hit. Where Amazing Studios struggled with 3D, they absolutely excelled in 2D to sell the threat of each encounter, giving every creature a distinct trait and personality. Each frame of animation indicates the difference between even similar looking creatures and what they are capable of doing. There is a unique death animation Andy goes through for every enemy, something that will occur a lot. For a game with a child-friendly rating, it's surprising how gruesome these casualties can get. With generous respawn points and a large collection of custom ways of dying, the game remains interesting to look at and not overly frustrating. The game is most certainly difficult though, and you will likely die hundreds of times before its conclusion, something I remember all too well from when I was younger. What's odd though about the difficulty and violence is how the game's cutscenes and story aims towards children. It isn't too bad up until a certain point where it goes full Phantom Menace. I mean, what the fuck? This character pretty much acts as nothing but comedy relief, and for a very small child at best. This juxtaposition between more adult-themed gameplay and kiddie characters just doesn't gel well, and it had me constantly cringing at later parts in the game. If you ignore the horrible inclusion of these characters, and can accept CGI has come a long way since 1998, the gameplay will more and back up being able to enjoy this experience. As far as cinematic platformers go, Heart of Darkness isn't the best, but at the same time it is still a fun adventure that can be appreciated for its animation and design. Unfortunately, it has not seen any digital release since its launch, making it difficult to obtain via official means. Remembered fondly by many who played it, it would be great to see it return at some point, at least on GOG or PlayStation Network. It's somewhat of a niche genre, but I'm glad to see current indie developers continue to keep cinematic platforms alive in new and exciting ways. Heart of Darkness may have its share of content that hasn't aged well, but for fans of similar games, there is certainly a level of art and skillful execution worth experiencing this game for.
Are you ready now to face the Heart of Darkness?